Thanks very much for joining me today. My name is Matt. I'm both a percussionist and a band teacher. I teach at Vincent Massey Collegiate in Winnipeg, Manitoba, grades 9 to 12. And before I did that, before I realized that I desperately missed teaching, I had a nice little niche carved out as a professional freelance percussionist. So if band and drums form a Venn diagram, I kind of live in the middle, which gives me a little bit of a cool, unique perspective on how some of this stuff goes. First of all, big thank you to Long McQuaid for the invite to do this. Long McQuaid and Trish Howe, thank you very much. And thank you for joining me today. This is going to be fun for me, and I hope for you too. We will be talking about a couple things. I hope to give you a little bit of an insight into the brain of a percussionist. It's a scary place, but it doesn't have to be. In terms of some of the things that might be different, thinking about things as a percussionist compared to a wind player. Hopefully you can take this and transfer it. If you want to do a percussion ensemble with your kids, some of this information might be helpful. If you're working in a wind band scenario or an orchestra, I hope that it will also be helpful. Your own particular contexts can be so variable that I'm gonna try not to make this a step 1, do this, step 2, do that, step 3, do this, but instead I'll just give you some things to think about, and then if you have any questions, you can email me. My email will be available at the end of the presentation. Don't be shy. Okay. So percussion doesn't need to be scary, folks. It's not the oboe, it's not the bassoon, it doesn't need to freak you out. Music is music, sound is sound, tone is tone, right? And we can get as picky or not about those things as we want to do. I feel like sometimes we get a little bit, the percussion section gets off the hook a little bit. And I've heard people say, and I know none of you would ever say this, but I've heard people say, oh, it's just drums, or it's just the triangle, or it's just the tambourine. Oh my gosh, don't make me come back there. It's important. You'll never have a band that plays more musically than your percussion section because everything they do is a solo, right? And it's so easily heard in the texture of an ensemble, just like you'll never have a band that sounds better than your tuba section. You'll never have a band that plays more musically than your percussionist because you just can't. It won't work. So therefore, getting picky about a couple things makes a lot of sense. And if you're going to get picky about a specific section of the ensemble, percussion, everybody's going to hear it all the time for better or for worse. So it makes sense to invest some effort in that. I remember one time being at a festival, watching someone play chimes with a clave. And I don't know what led to that. Like, I don't know if it was oh my gosh, I left my chime hammers at home, I guess I just have to use a clave. But I do know it sounded like an Afro-Cuban grandfather clock, so that didn't really cut it for me. So being picky about certain things in percussion and not letting other things slide, very important. Okay, tone is tone, sound is sound, right? And we've all done however many years of music school, so we know what sounds good and we know what doesn't sound good. And you can be picky about percussion in exactly that way. Sometimes the dialect is just a little bit different. So when you're talking to your ensemble and you're like, more air, more wind, support, breath support, all of those things that we encourage for 99% of the ensemble. That's not really the language that a percussionist is going to understand. But they are going to understand the idea of a melody, right? They're going to understand the idea of line. They're going to understand the idea of connecting things. They're going to understand the idea of pulse subdivision. And whereas like wind is kind of the magic word to make things work a little bit better in a band situation, fixes 99% of the problems, the word for that in percussion town is lift. Right? So if you've got a kid who's just smashing the wood block and just crank, 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 and you're not getting that resonance, just get them to lift the sound out. Lift is the magic word. If it's supposed to be quiet and clear and it's just like a mess on the snare drum, lift. Just lift all those little things out. It's going to be better. If you're getting a timpani sound that's not resonant and full enough, just lift the sound out. Again, magic word, lift. Start at the beginning. Choosing your percussionists, holy smokes, so important. Not only are they the farthest away from you in a typical band situation, so you know how you put the troublemakers at the front? Yeah, percussion, that's not an option. I mean, you could, and I've had rehearsals where, you wheel the percussion up to the front and you have the percussionists play at the band and the band plays at the percussion, and like it's super cool and it's fun and it's awesome, but if you've got a little yahoo back there, that's always a little yahoo, oh my gosh. The most important part in the percussion section is to have people that are independent and reliable. Because you think about all the things non-music related that you ask your percussionists to do. Clean up after themselves, hopefully. And I'm bad for that. My wife can attest to that. I'm not your guy for that. But it's really important to have kids in the back row that understand, that have that sense of responsibility. Taking care of the gear that costs so much money, right? It's designed to be hit. It's not designed to be beat up. So you definitely want kids back there that are going to understand that. The teamwork aspect as a percussion section is super important. Sometimes, especially in younger band music, it's not always written, one part is for this person, one part's for that person, one part is for this person. People are dividing up parts and like, okay, I'll play the snare drum here. You got the tambourine? Yeah, okay. And you get that teamwork thing going on. Moving equipment, like when you got to move stuff down to the gym and back, like the flute player, bing, funk, good to go. Percussionist, not exactly the same idea. So you want to make sure that they've got that extra level of commitment. They are going to be the first ones in the door on concert day, and they're going to be the last ones out every single time. So you want to make sure that you pick the right kid for that. In terms of skills that they need to have, I do like the idea of auditioning percussionists. Not that it needs to be a super selective art form, but you do kind of want to have some control over the people that are in that back room, not just from a personality point of view, but certain things really help. Ideas of coordination, right? Like as a percussionist, you're going to want to be coordinated. You're going to want to have that right hand, left hand thing down. Sometimes you even need to use your feet. Oh my gosh, what is that? Couple of different ways to check that out. This exercise, tapping the head, rubbing the belly, switching it up. Great. You can immediately see like where the kid's at in terms of that. You can take them down to the gym, have them dribble 2 basketballs, one hand to the next, have them carry on a conversation while they're dribbling the basketballs. You'll be able to tell pretty quick who's kind of got that natural inclination to get that going. You might also want to think about having them sing, because the pitch reference is very important. We don't often think about that in Percussion Town, but if you want to tune timpani, it's exactly like there's no frets on a timpani. So you want to have someone with a really good ear back there that can figure some things out. You might want to have them sing. And you might also want to have them understand how a piano or a keyboard's laid out. Just be aware that if they don't come into the game with that already locked and loaded, especially if you work in a program where kids choose, let's say, trumpet, trombone, flute, or clarinet in the first year, one of those types of smaller structures, and then they get to branch out in the second year. There's a whole world worth of pitch and keyboard layout that they're going to just have to jump right into with very little time or training. So that might be something to think about. Just be aware of that as you keep going. Where do you start with a group of young percussionists? Always on the snare drum and always on mallets, and both at the same time, right? Everything kind of comes out of those two things. Snare drum technique transfers almost everywhere else except to the timpani. Timpani is a little bit goofy, and we'll talk about that in a second. But snare drum's a great place to start, as is mallets. And if you start snare drum and mallets at the same time and go back and forth, the kids just think it's normal, right? Sometimes we get to a spot in high school where kids are coming in, and I'm like, all right, hey, here's a mallet part, and they look at me like I'm crazy, and they're like, I don't play mallets. I play snare drum, or I play bass drum. It's like, oh my gosh, no, you play percussion, you play the whole thing. And then it's a catch-up game. So if you start with mallets and snare drum, that's a really great place to just start, and then you can go kind of anywhere from those two places. In a wind band situation, motivating percussionists and engaging them when you're working on concepts that are specifically air-driven can be kind of tricky, right? Because the percussionists, like no matter how awesome you are as a teacher, the reality is that the percussionists are not moving air through their instruments. So every time you're talking about moving air through the instruments, which is probably the most important thing to talk about, especially in a young band situation, they got to know how to move the air. You're talking to them, and the percussionists start to hear that and go, oh, here we go with the air again. So you kind of gotta give them little ideas or little opportunities to be engaged kind of in their own right. I focus on the fact that the ones who learn the most are the ones who aren't playing, right? So what do percussionists have to offer? They've got ears, right? And I know that sounds silly because we all have ears, but if you've chosen your percussionist the right way, they're probably pretty sharp, and they're probably pretty musical, so they have ears. And if the ones who learn the most are the ones who aren't playing, you can have them you can have them come up to the front and describe to you what they're hearing from the sound of the band. So you're training their ears, you're training everyone else's this, and you're ready to go. Beat pulse subdivision. That's our bread and butter, right? Like we have a specific moment where whatever we're playing with hits the drum, and that is the time, right? So we start to learn about time pulse subdivision in a whole different way because it happens immediately, right? Creating sound on a snare drum, you just touch it and there's your sound, right? As opposed to engaging the air and getting everything going and articulating and coordinating the fingers and the tongue. We're not doing that. We're just bloop, there it is. Like straight ahead, nice and easy. So we've got that in the bag. So anytime you want a pulse or beat or subdivision reference, get your percussionist on it right away. Hey folks, we're going to turn on a metronome. Can you subdivide eighth notes for me, percussion section on an instrument of your choice? Here we go. Everybody else, we're going to hold a whole note. You know, that kind of thing, getting them all good to go. And then the kids that you're working with in the ensemble setting, they start to understand that sense of time and beat and subdivision as well. The other thing that percussionists have in the bag on lock is pitch on a mallet instrument, right? So if you're looking for a drone, or if you're looking to have kids, you know, match a pitch or sing or any of those things, get the xylophone player or the vibraphone player to just play, you know, an octave B flat, and just hang out there and have the kids play over top of that, and, you know, listen back for the sense of pitch, and you can do a whole series of exercises on that. And the percussionists will love it because they're like, we're helping, and they'll feel super engaged and excited. So because we deal in an oral art form, right? So something that we listen to, sound is the most important thing that we do. Tone always wins, is the most important. And the way that we create sound on a percussion instrument is just a little bit different because it doesn't involve air, right? It's the lightning and the thunder, right? It's the split second of contact between material and material, and then it's the resonance that happens as a result of that, right? So attack, resonance. And this means that your mallet and your instrument choice in terms of construction, material, how it's made, super important. I have a couple of trumpet player friends who are, you know, all about, you know, what mouthpiece they use, and like they use this mouthpiece for this and this mouthpiece for that. And, you know, I totally understand that, because as a percussionist, you have to be so picky, because the sound and the tone, like your body as a percussionist has less to do with that than perhaps a wind instrument, right? Because the sound isn't coming from within you, the sound is coming from this external apparatus that you're using to create the sound. So whatever your mallet is made of, or whatever your instrument is made of, whether it's of high or low quality, so important. It is almost impossible to make a garbage instrument sound good as a percussionist. It's so tough. It's so tough, no matter how good you are. And I have a list of, you know, suggested mallets and suggested gear and equipment, yada yada. Again, if you want that, email me. Email will be available at the end of the presentation. I'll send that off to you. It's a little bit big to talk about right now, but it is very important. The material that you use to play, and then the material that you're playing on, very, very, very important. In terms of artistic decisions, you want to, I think it's so important to create a sense of artistry in your percussionists, because again, they're so far away and they're so independent that you want them doing stuff on their own before you even get to them, right? And because you'll never have an ensemble that plays more musically than your percussionists, cultivating that sense of artistry in your percussion is super important. Making sound on any percussion, or I should say making noise on any percussion instrument, not hard. You look at it, you touch it, there's a noise, right? But we all know that that's not a good sound. So encouraging them to really think about how they're creating that sound. Like, okay, why did you use that pair of mallets? What were you trying to match? Why did you use that pair of mallets? What sound were you listening to there, and who are you trying to match? Was that more of a trombone sound, or was that more of a flute sound, or, you know, what are you trying to match? This will pay huge dividends later on, because then you can say stuff to your percussionists, like you can get them to play a little lick on the xylophone and say to the flute section, yeah, that's the articulation we're going for, right? Like percussion articulation, it is what it is, right? It's almost non-negotiable. When you hit that xylophone, that's your articulation. And you can change it and you can alter it based on how you play it or what you use to play it with, but it's very, very precise, which is another thing that percussionists can offer your rehearsal. Again, just always be asking your percussionist why. You know, if they choose to play if you don't like the sound, get on them. Get on them. Like if that wood block doesn't sound resonant and dark and awesome and open and cluck, 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 like get on them. Be like, hey, is there something you can do to that wood block to make that a little bit more resonant and a little bit more open? And then have them experiment with it, and they'll figure it out. You know, they've got ears, they'll figure it out. I always like to ask them, you know, what and how regarding their plans, right? Because sometimes you've got percussionists that are playing more than one thing at a time. So you always want to make sure you've got that under control. Like, hey bud, how are you going to switch from kabasa to snare drum in 4 bars? Or even better, how are you going to switch from kabasa to snare drum in 4 beats? Oh, no problem. I've got a blanket here on the floor and I've got it wrapped up in a towel. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to drop the kabasa into that soft little thing, pick up the sticks and play. Great, awesome. Super glad you thought of that. And then you can always be asking them like who in terms of their sound models. Okay, percussion section, who are you trying to match here? Timpanist, who are you supporting in that crescendo? Bass drum, who are you like what sound are you trying to match? What other instrument in the room is playing the same thing as you are, and who are you trying to match? And that goes both ways, right? Okay, tuba player, it's a march. What percussion instrument are you trying to match? Well, I'm trying to match the bass drum. Heck yeah, you are. Flute section, that septuplet run that goes. Who are you trying to match? Oh yeah, the xylophone has that too. Heck yes, it does. That kind of thing. Okay, so here's the fun stuff, the part where we actually get to hit some things. If you have like a pair of sticks and a snare drum or a practice pad, like feel free to follow along. I'll do my best Richard Simmons impression. We can like sweat to the oldies. It is very awkward for me to do this and talk to both everyone and no one all at once. So if I seem a little bit awkward, like my sincere apologies. But you're not here, so it doesn't really matter. Okay, snare drum. In terms of holding the stick, if you've got Vic Firth sticks, coach your kids to put their thumbs on the flags. If they don't have Vic Firth sticks, then you can just tell them to go, about a quarter to a third of the way up. You don't want it to be all the way up here because that just feels weird, and you don't want it to be all the way back here because that's too heavy. It's Goldilocks. Put it in the middle, thumb on the flag, boom, there you go. There should be the fulcrum, which is where the stick goes, right, science, between your thumb and your little baby knuckle right there on your pointer finger. So if you've got like a rod between your thumb and your baby knuckle, that's where the fulcrum actually happens. You'll notice that my fingers are staying on the stick. Lots of times you get kids doing this, T with the queen, and that like really compromises your amount of control that you've got, and it creates tension. And any tension on the snare drum, any tension in percussion land at all is really rough. So you want to make sure thumbs on the flags, fingers are on the stick, and then your palms are down. That's really important, not to the side. You see this a lot too. Palms are down, sticks are in a triangle, okay? You also want to make sure that the stroke comes from the wrist and not the arm. This, way too many calories. I worked hard for that. I'm going to keep them. I'm not going to spend them playing drums. Stroke comes from the wrist all the time, okay? Again, palms down, triangle, stroke from the wrist, sticks are in a V. Stick height determines how loud you play, primarily. So keep your sticks down for quiet, bring your sticks up for a little bit more. As with any other percussion instrument, lift is the word that solves all the problems. Just like in a wind band, air, wind, that kind of concept fixes 99% of the issues. The idea of lift, right, versus just does a whole bunch of sound things in percussion that are really great. The last thing that I would encourage you to think about is where the drum is actually situated. If it's too high, you get tension up here. You're going to be ripped like Arnold Schwarzenegger, but you're going to sound bad. And then the same deal as if it's down here, right? There's too much tension here, and it's just not a great situation because then it's going to be really hard to roll. So you just keep it nice and steady here. A really great warm-up exercise for kiddos when they're first getting started with snare drum: 8 on one hand, 8 on the next hand, 4 on one hand, 4 on the next hand, 2, 2, 1, 1. So starting here. And then backwards. And then the next step in difficulty for that exercise would be to go like 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, back up, starting with 8, 7, 6, etc., etc., etc. When you're playing on the drum, in terms of playing spot, depends a little bit with dynamics. Usually, unless there's a reason that you're not playing pretty much in the middle of the drum, you want to be kind of in the middle of the drum, maybe just a little bit off center, because it gives you the most resonance and the most beef to your sound. So this is generally going to be a better sound than out here. You get that like ticka, 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 and you don't want that. What you want on the snare drum is you want that snare sound. You want to make sure that your snare drum lever is right in a line going that way, because then you're always playing over the snares. So if you want to get quiet, you can go towards the edge of the drum, but then you're still over top of the snares because the snares run that way, so they're in a straight line. And if you're always playing over the snares, you're always going to get snare sound. Loud, less loud, right? Move that way, move this way, depending on your dynamics. In terms of how you actually get the best sound, all about lift, right? So this doesn't sound good. This has has a much different sound, right? You want to think about drawing the sound out of the drum as opposed to putting it in, and that's pretty crucial for any percussion instrument. The height that the drum's at, somewhere around your waist, right? If it's up here, uncomfortable, tension. If it's down here, uncomfortable, tension, right? The more tension you can get rid of, the easier it's going to be to play, the less you're going to be hanging on for dear life, that kind of thing. Okay, stick control exercises. There's a great book. It's literally called Stick Control. It's got a gray cover. I'm sure it's going to be on the list that Long McQuaid sends out with all the resources. A couple of really good pages at the beginning of that book, and it's just a whole bunch of different ways that you can combine, rights and lefts and get going. I love putting this on. Earlier in the year when we couldn't play wind instruments here in Manitoba, we were doing drumming on chairs, so every kid had a pair of drumsticks, and you'd think that would be heaven for me, and I really did miss wind band a lot. So everyone was just ripping on chairs, and it was actually a lot of fun. Figured out pretty quick that the metronome is not really an inspiring tool to teach with. Like, it's good. It'll tell you what's right and what's wrong to a fault. The actual fun comes from not using a metronome, comes from using a different pulse technique. So I put on, Michael Jackson, Earth, Wind, and Fire. My teaching partner used Jamiroquai a lot. Like, anything with a really solid metronome effect is going to work really well. Michael Jackson's the bomb for that. So I would just flip that on and use the first couple pages of that stick technique book, Stick Control, and just have them play exercise after exercise, repeat it 5 times. Again, it'll be on the resource list. Great way to just get them kind of going and get their hands to be even. You'll notice that most of the kids in your class are probably going to be right-handed, so they're going to want to start stuff on their right hand and end stuff on their right hand. I just suggest getting them to start with their left hand from the beginning, right? Because then it normalizes it, and it'll be super cool for the left-hand kids. They'll be like, oh my gosh, I've never felt so seen. I'm left-handed, so I really appreciate when people, toss a bone to the lefties. It's hard enough to write in binders, just, cut us some slack. So start with your left hand, and then make sure that they're doing things on both hands, and that really works quite well. Another exercise, and again, I've got all these in handout form, and I can't just give them to you because we're actually not in the same room, which is super weird for me if you can't tell. Very awkward. But you can email me. My contact information will be on a slide at the end, and I'll send you all this stuff in paper form if you want. Really great accent exercise to get the kids lifting and to get them working their accents on both hands. Again, they're going to usually be more confident with their dominant hand doing accents. So to get to kind of force the issue and get them to do stuff on the other hand, really great early on, because then they just think it's normal, right? Like, it's not hard, it's just normal. Thinking in 16th notes, 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a, you just put the accent on a different part of that 16th note figure every time through. So 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E, etc., etc. And I usually get them to come back to putting it on the downbeat so that they don't lose track of where that downbeat is. So what it ends up looking like and sounding like is this. Etc., etc., etc. And I'll give you, I can, again, email me and I can write that out for you. Developing the role for young musicians. This is the part where, like, when you ask someone who doesn't normally teach percussion, okay, so how do you teach a role? Like, there is no way to just kind of, like, get them to roll, right? There's no magic potion. It's not like, okay, put your lips together, say M, blow air through them, make a buzz. Okay, now here's a trumpet, right? Like, it's not quite that intuitive for kids, because they actually have to go home and struggle with it and, like, figure out how it feels and, like, learn physics and, like, kinesthetics in order to do it. So there's one exercise that I use all the freaking time. Step 1 to the exercise, have them take their dominant hand and just have them let it bounce on the head. Again, thinking about the playing position, the fulcrum, the wrist, all that stuff, and just let it drop and just see what it does. You're going to get this. Mr. Abraham, it's not working. Okay, when it's like that, it's just that they're pushing down too much. They just got to let it drop and then let the stick do its thing. You're also going to get this. Mr. Abraham, it's not working. That's because you're not actually, like, keeping the stick in a downward position. You're not pushing down per se, but you are preventing the stick from coming all the way back up. If it comes all the way back up, oops, if it comes all the way back up, science doesn't work that way. If it goes all the way down, again, science doesn't work that way. It's that butter zone. I often tell kids it's like skipping a stone. If you ever saw me when I was 3 years old, I couldn't figure out how to skip a stone. I'd take the thing, I'd be like, sploosh, and it wouldn't work, and I'd be like, Dad, it's not working. There's like that butter zone between way too far up and way too far down. It's the same thing working with the stick, right? You can't push down too hard, but you also have to push like a tiny little bit in order to get the stick to zzz, 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 zzz. So you just get them doing that, and then you can ask them to do things like, hey, can you make the bounces closer together? Sure can, Mr. Abraham. Hey, cool, can you open them up? You got it, Mr. A. Right, and you get them kind of getting used to that control of the bounce, right? Wrist moves once, tip of the stick moves a whole bunch of times. Once they kind of figure that out on both hands, then you can get them trying to get 3 bounces per hand. And again, that's getting a little bit picky at the beginning stage, but you know what, why not? It's not hard if you get them to do it right away. It's hard if you get them to learn something else and then be like, oh, by the way, you should only be getting 3 bounces per hand. They're like, why'd you lie to me for a month? If you can get them to get 3 bounces, 1 wrist movement, 3 bounces. That's the butter zone for rolls, okay? There are times where you need 2. There are times when you need 3. And that's pretty much all, that's all I ever use. The actual exercise for the roll goes a little something like this. And again, written copy is available, email me. Starting thinking in 8 notes, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. You're going to do single strokes. And there you do 4 quarter note buzz strokes on one hand only. So, etc., etc., etc. And then again, always make sure you do it on the other hand too. Usually the right hand one, they're going to get faster. The left hand one's going to sound like a hot mess. And you can just reinforce with them. If your hands are even, you will sound even. Make sure that they're holding it the same way. Sometimes you'll get this. You'll get like fingers on top of the stick, right? That harshes the bounce. That gets in the way of the buzz. Sometimes you'll get kids that are like stroking from their elbows. Again, so many calories. I earned them. I don't want to spend them on playing drums. It's all in the wrist, and it's all just nice and loose. Think about the lift. Everything's good. Once they get that one down, 8 notes and then the quarter notes, you can go staying with the quarter notes for the bounce section, but you can go hand to hand. So it's going to be. And then everybody's happy because then you're trying to get the hands to sound the same. Once that's done, you're going to get them to do 8 notes, and then you're going to get them to bounce the 8 notes. It doesn't need to sound like a roll yet, right? It's just this. What you're trying to get them to do is you're trying to get them to think in metering, and you're trying to get them to think 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and za 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 za, so that they've got a concrete idea of when they're rolling, when they start, and when they end, right? If it's a half note roll, 1, 2, 3, 4, za, right? You want them to be able to keep time through that. It's not quite the same as just blowing through a long note and then stopping, because we actually have to move through it. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and za 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 gives them that concept of metering. The metering is going to change depending on the tempo of the piece. If it's a really slow piece of music, they're going to have to meter their roll a little bit faster. They're going to have to pack the strokes in a little bit more. If it's a little bit of a faster piece of music, they might not have time, so they can go to a broader sense of meter, and it's going to be okay. The last step of the roll exercise, like I said, and then what you do is you just speed that up a bit. And they figure it out. They're like, oh my gosh, I'm rolling. Yes, you are. Good for you. Last thing for snare drum. Keeping time. A couple little metronome games you can play on the snare drum. I really like throwing on, okay, this one I do use the metronome because I like to be able to manipulate it. And when I try to change the tempo on Michael Jackson, it doesn't work so well. I like to put a metronome on, start at, I don't know, like 80 beats per minute, have them do a rhythmic pattern or whatever, it doesn't even matter. But then I turn the metronome down and I get them to keep playing. And then over time, I turn the metronome back up and we see if we line up. right? And after doing that a couple times, they usually start to figure it out, and they start listening really, really hard as the metronome goes away, right? And then they're like, okay. And then they can almost hear it strongly in their brain, and I encourage them to do that. I'm like, can you hear the metronome in their brain? Yes, Mr. Abraham. And then we turn it back up slowly, and they start to line up. I also like changing where the beat is, so instead of putting the metronome on the quarter note, get them to play any sort of rhythm, doesn't really matter. Put the metronome on the eighth note. So all of a sudden they have to feel the downbeat by themselves, and then the is on the upbeat. Great exercise. The other thing I like to do is instead of having the metronome on every beat, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. Just take away beat 2 and 4. 1, 3, 1, 3, and then they start filling in those holes. And then once they get that done, take away the metronome on beat 3 as well. 1, 1, and see if they can line that up. And you can put that anywhere you want. You can put it on beat 2 and 4. You can put it on beat 3. You can put it on beat 4. It doesn't matter. Okay, one more exercise, really great. It got a little bit harder when phone books became less of a, everywhere type of thing. Grab a phone book. Yellow Pages works really well. And open it up, pick a number. Set a metronome to 60 beats per minute. And then in the phone number, every number that's in the phone number represents the subdivision for a beat as it goes by. So for example, we've got a pizza restaurant here in Manitoba, 2222222, which is great because no matter what happens, you can always remember that number. No matter what else you've done that evening, you can still remember how to get your pizza. And that would just be a string of 8 notes, right? 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, string of 8 notes. 2, 3, 3, 2, 3, 2, 3 would be 8th note, triplet, 8th note, 8th note, triplet, 8th note, triplet. Did I get that? Whatever. It would sound like this. Right? Every beat represents, or rather every number in the phone number represents its own subdivision. And this can be a lot of fun for kids because they feel super good when they start getting 5s and 7s. And again, it doesn't have to be hard. It's only hard because they haven't done quintuplets, right? If you just say, oh yeah, everybody say university. University. Okay, now we're going to put a metronome on, or Michael Jackson. Say university, 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 and etc. You can teach them how to do that by rote really, really quickly. Then you just let them know, like, hey, it's pretty much 16th notes, but you end on a different hand. It's so very close. That's not hard. No, it's not. And then they're off to the races, and they feel really good about it because then they can do 5s and 7s. And there we go. That's snare drum. Over to the timpani. All right, timpani has a little bit of a different hand/stroke technique to snare drum, where snare drum is fingers, fulcrum, wrist motion, right? And sticks are in a V. Timpani is a little bit different because if you do the snare drum technique on timpani, it just sounds very aggressive. It sounds very thud, 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 thud. It's a little bit harder to get some of that resonance. So what we do, imagine, I'm just going to walk over this way for a second and the camera's going to follow me somehow magically. What a world we live in, folks. Cameras. What a world. Get the kids to stand in front of a door like this. Preferably one that has knobs that rotate, right? And so what you want is you want your thumb on top of the doorknob. Just get them to, rotate their wrist back and forth. There we go. And then you go back over to the drums. Come on, camera, let's go for a walk. Yes, camera. And you do the same thing just with sticks in your hand. So whereas the doorknob was ooh, the sticks are and there you go. So you've got doorknob technique on timpani. The reason why we do that, again, it's just a little bit less aggressive and it gives a little bit more resonance to the sound. Right? It's a little bit easier to lift up. As with all percussion instruments, lift is the most important word, whereas and I think I probably said this earlier in the presentation, you know how wind fixes 99% of problems in a wind band situation. Percussion-wise, that magic word is lift. You want it to be quieter and more articulate? Lift. You want it to be a little bit more present and full? Lift. The idea is that you lift from your wrist all the time. What you'll get often is kids doing like fake lift, where like they lift with their arm. Look, I'm lifting. No, you're not. Calm down. Too many calories. It's all from the wrist. And then if your arm ends up moving, it's because the wrist has moved so much. Right? That's just a function of my wrist moving a lot. In terms of You'll probably notice that I'm sitting down. A couple reasons for that. Number one, if you have a choice between standing or sitting, sit. Number two, it's because it puts you at the right level for the drums, right? Like I am not a tall dude, and even if I was to stand up and try and play drums, you'll notice that they're lower than where the snare drum would be, right? Like they're lower than kind of beltish, belly button level in there. So what that does is it gives more tension here in my arms, and it's just gonna get in my way, right? Whereas if I sit down, going from standing to sitting, perfect. Right, there you go. Also, sitting makes it a lot easier to tune on the fly, to do pedal tuning, that kind of thing. It's also more comfortable, straight up. And there are kind of two different schools schools of thought on the issue. There are people who are like, no, sitting is wrong and you must stand. But even those people still sit when there's lots of tuning to be done. So like, we can't be that wrong, us sitter folk. So sit down, be comfortable. Why stand when you can sit? Okay, where to play on the drum? This in the middle, garbage. Sounds super bad. And you wouldn't believe how many times you go to a festival and you see like kids that don't really know how to play timpani doing like some George of the Jungle in the middle. And of course we tell our wind band folks, right? Like in a wind band situation, we're always like resonance and depth of sound and darkness of color and all those things. I mean, that all applies on percussion as well. So you want that resonance, you want that depth, and the way to get that is definitely not in the middle of the drum. Usually there's lugs on either side of the pedal. So I've got two lug nuts here. If I draw a line between those two in the center, makes a nice little triangle. And then if you just kind of play center-ish of that triangle, maybe not center, but like, down a little bit lower, I don't know, maybe 2 inches off the rim, 3 inches, maybe, whatever. You'll find a spot that sounds really, really, really great. Right, and you get that nice resonance. Up here, boo, too close to the rims, boo, and you don't want either of those. As with anything in percussion land, timpani is kind of the ultimate art of pragmatism, right? When it sounds good, you do it. Especially tambourine, but we'll talk about that in a second. Okay, in terms of tuning the timpani, get a pitch reference, whether that's a tuning fork or a pitch pipe or whatever. I try to avoid using getting a tuba player or a string bass player to play the note, because what happens if they're out of tune? And in a grade 7, 8, grade 6 band, like guaranteed that's going to be the issue. So get a pretty solid pitch reference. You can get it from a xylophone, marimba, whatever. Like I said, pitch pipe. I wouldn't use a tuner, because the tuners have a little bit of a tricky time differentiating between the sound that's coming off the bowl and the sound that's coming off the head, right? The head is not necessarily in tune all the way around. I mean, it is if you've had it like cleared and you've done the tuning and everything, but we all know that lasts for about 45 seconds and then it's done. So I would just get a pitch reference from something, sing it in your head, and then you put your head right down so your ear is right above the timpani, and you can either tap or flick with your finger. Again, this is a pet peeve for me, but like nothing drives me crazier than this. To be flat, I'm done. Like, no, oh my gosh, no. Just tap or flick. Check again, and then you're done, right? So if the pitch that you're singing matches the pitch on the timpani, you're done. If you miss it, that's okay. Go back down. Until you gliss up to the note. Always tune from underneath. It's exactly like a guitar in that way, because if you tune from above, there's going to be some extra tension sitting on the head, and then it'll fall flat over time. So always, even if you have to like change notes or whatever, make sure that you go underneath the note and then come back up to the new note. Don't just tune from top down, because otherwise it'll fall flat over time and it'll drive you nuts. Muffling the drum. 2 different ways to muffle. You can either muffle exactly in the playing spot, which kills the sound pretty much right away, or you can muffle off to the side, which is a little bit of a gentler, like, oh yeah, look at how ethereal that release is. And again, just like any other instrument, you want the percussionist to be thinking this way, because how you end a note is just as important as how you start it, right? How you enter into silence is as important as how you enter into sound. So if they're thinking about that, they're making all sorts of cool artistic decisions, and they're learning that independence for themselves. So yeah, in the playing spot, fingertips, sound over. Over here, oh, magic. The other thing is rolls on timpani, very different than rolls on snare drum. There's no bouncing, okay? And this is a little bit goofy because on top of the timpani, it sounds a certain way when you're rolling. It's like, am I really rolling? I can hear the strokes. I don't think I'm rolling. But as soon as you walk like 5 feet away, it sounds like a roll, right? And the timpani is at the back of the ensemble. So as soon as you get to the first row of the audience, it's just going to sound like an open roll. On timpani, slow rolls are magic, okay? The perfect roll speed, if you want to get like super mathy about it, the perfect kind of default spot to start and then adjust from is sextuplets at 80 beats per minute, right? That's like, hello metronome. It's about here. If I do that without that on there, out in the audience, that's going to sound like a great roll. That's going to be super good. Now if it's like way up here and like super tight, you might have to roll a little bit faster. On the lowest drum, you might even be able to get away with rolling a little bit slower because it's all about letting the resonance take over. The resonance hides the individual sound, which is why when you roll super fast, I mean, that's not a roll. All you get is clicky, clicky, clicky off the top of the head, right? Same is true if you bounce it. It harshes all of the resonance coming from the bowl, and all you get is head noise. So even on top of the drum, it's like, oh, hey, that sounds like a roll. But like 5 feet away, it sounds super thin and gross, and you don't want that at all. So again, sextuplets at 80, kind of a good place to start. You'll notice that the stroke is coming from the wrist, and the lift is pretty extreme, because that's how we're creating the resonance. Cross-sticking versus shifting. When you're moving drum to drum to drum to drum, there's kind of two ways to do it. I prefer something called shifting, which means that you're not moving your hand over top of another hand at any given time. Very few exceptions, sometimes depending on the way things are written and the way things are sticked or which drums you're using, sometimes you have no choice but to just, pop over here for a quick second and cross over. But whenever you can, try not to. The way to do that is you just shift your entire body. So if I'm on this drum, and I want to go over to this drum, I just shift my whole body. So I'm gonna start with my left hand, and I'm gonna move over with my left hand, which means that slow motion is going to be this. Whoop! This comes along for the ride. And then we're there, so I'm shifting my whole self. I'm going to do that backwards, leading with my right hand. I shift my whole way. The alternative, I'm being facetious, but it just gets in the way. There are people who do it really, really well, better than I do, but anytime I can, save some calories and just make it a little bit easier and a little bit more slick, I'm going to do it. That's pretty much it for timpani. In the repairs section of the video, we'll talk about how you can actually get someone to repair your mallets. So when you go through the felt, or when the kids have been touching it or picking at it or licking it or eating it, or I have no idea what middle school kids do back there. There is a way to do it where you don't have to buy new mallets. You can just find someone who knows what they're doing. It's basically like sewing. Actually, it's exactly like sewing. So if you can hem pants, you can hem timpani mallets. But we'll talk about that more in the repair section. Okay, so marimba. Very, very similar to snare drum in the way that you hold the stick, right? Don't hold it up here. Don't hold it back here, right? Maybe about a third of the way up. Palms are down. Sticks are in a triangle. And the fulcrum is between the thumb and that little baby knuckle. In some cases, especially in some elementary music programs, right, they're coached to put their fingers on top like this. The reason we don't do that here is because there's just too much tension that way, right? As soon as you do that, you can actually feel it all the way up through here, and it also kind of puts a cap on how you can lift and how you can move, right? Whereas that's to the side, then it's a very natural, organic lifting feeling, and again, lift is the most important word in percussion. When you're actually playing the mallet instrument, marimba, vibraphone, xylophone, it's all the same in terms of how you actually do it. You want to move with yourself. That sounds so dumb. move with yourself. You want to go where the notes go, and you want to keep everything kind of centered. So if you're going all the way up, woo, you're going to move with it. And again, all the way down, you're going to move with it. This tension, this tension. The other big thing that you'll notice, a huge difference in sound between playing right over the strings, pentatonic, right? Playing over the strings and then playing in the middle. Massive difference in resonance and in sound. So you want to encourage folks to play in the middle of the bar over the resonators at all time. Now that's pretty easy when you're talking about the white keys. You know, this row right here. Gets a little bit tricky when they're moving between the white keys and the black keys. And what I find is that when I tell kids to like aim for the middle, they always, without fail, end up hitting the closest string every time. So then I just start telling them to aim for the farthest string because they'll never actually hit it. It's so far away and they'll wind up in the middle. There we go. So you can use that one. I find it works. Aim for the far string, you'll land in the middle. Okay, Mr. Abraham. There are also instances where you're going to be asked to play, especially in some more advanced repertoire, you might be asked to play with 2 mallets in each hand. It's called 4-mallet technique. There's a whole different kettle of fish involved with that. If you're interested in that and you want to be a mallet rock star, email me and we can go back and forth and I'll get you set up and hooked up with that. Completely different kettle of fish. Definitely don't have time to talk about that right now, but if you're interested, shoot me an email and we'll hook it up. All right, quick note about mallet rolls. Just like timpani, you don't buzz on the mallets. It's all just lift. And you can roll a lot slower than you probably think you need to. Set a metronome. This is a great exercise for helping kids figure it out. Quarter notes, 8 notes, 16ths, 30 seconds, right? And then you just go through that several times. The next level of that, to help kids figure out how to end on different hands if they have to, is start throwing in the triplets. That'll help them figure out how to roll. The speed of the roll is dependent on the speed of the music that's going on, right? If you've only got a couple of quick seconds, just a quick little roll. If it's in a lower register, you don't have to roll quite as fast because you've got more resonance. If it's way up here, you might have to roll just a little bit faster because you've got a little bit less resonance. That's rolls on a marimba. Okay, triangle. Actually the most underrated instrument of all time. And I always tell the kids, like, hey, did you know the person playing the triangle with the Winnipeg Symphony gets paid the same as everybody else? Because it's actually true, they do. And you know, if you think about the pay per note as a violinist and the pay per note as a triangleist, whatever, it's pretty good. So, triangle. For a clip, you want to grab one of these. It's a Grover wooden clip. They are just so far superior to everything else that's out there. Don't get the plastic ones, get the wood one. Like, it's another couple of bucks, but just do it. Really, really great. When you're holding the clip, triangle goes in. It's like you're holding a glass of water. Take your pointer finger away, thumb on the back, middle finger on the front, pointer finger just keeps it secure. Like that. In terms of your grip on the beater, it's very much like a timpani, right? Or a timpani mallet. You've got it this way, and it's just lifting the stroke out like that. So, in practice, I always get the kids to like aim at me through the triangle and be like, and if they can like intimidate me, I don't know, I toss them like a toonie, be like, hey, if I get intimidated by you looking at me through the triangle, you get $2. They're like, yeah. So they hold it up that way. If I tell them to hold it up, they don't hold it up. You know, but if I'm like, hey, stare at me through the triangle without actually saying hold it up, they'll do it for some reason. Man, whatever. And then you stare at them, and then there it is. You'll notice that I'm playing the triangle on a 45-degree angle with the beater. Reason is because if you play it dead on, and I do this with the kids too, I'm like, hey, what do you like the sound of better? Or, usually they're like, the first one. And I'm like, cool, why? And they say, well, because it's pure, and it's crisp, and it's clean, and it's beautiful. Which all of those things are true, but it's actually a definite pitch, right? Like, it's actually a specific pitch. So if you are unfortunate enough to not have that pitch in the key of the beginning band piece of music that you're playing, like, I don't know what this is. Somewhere in there. you know, unless you've got an A flat hanging out in you know, March Zuma, then we've got a problem because you're actually playing a wrong note every time you play the triangle. So playing it on a 45-degree angle allows some of those overtones to come through, and it hides the fundamental pitch of the triangle, so it actually shimmers and blends with whatever you're doing. Two different places you can play the triangle. Play it on the bottom, generally a little darker. You can play it on the closed side, generally a little bit brighter. And then in terms of rolling, chow call, this happens so often. Look at how many calories. Look at how many calories. It's just in the corner, and it's just a little wiggle. So you put it in the corner, again, playing like just like a timpani. You put it in the corner, and then you just wiggle it in the corner. Louder up here, softer. Dinner time. Right? That's a triangle roll. There we go. All right, tambourine technique. Tambourine is actually my favorite instrument, and I could fill an entire hour with just tambourine, so I'm going to try not to do that. Hold it in your weak hand. Reason why is because you want your strong hand to be able to do the fancy stuff. Your weak hand will eventually learn how to roll. It won't be a problem. Holding it, that little hole, not for your finger, right? Your hand goes around it. Glass of water, tambourine in there. Lock it around that way. Thumb on top, hold it on a 45-degree angle. Why 45? Definite. So keep it on a 45-degree angle. Your striking hand, I tell the kids to make like a duck, right? And the number of fingers that you use is the volume of the tambourine. 1 finger, 2 fingers, 3 fingers, 4 fingers, middle, fist, like whatever. It's the ultimate art of pragmatism. If it sounds good, do it. 3 types of rolls. Roll number 1, up beside your head. It's all about the torque. Snap it one way, then snap it the other way. And then just speed that up a bit. Tambourine roll. This, way too many calories. Looks fun, way too many calories. Roll number 2, out in front of you. You know how I said never have it in a straight line? Lied to you. This hand on the bottom, it's like a salmon swimming upstream. The idea here is to keep this hand on the tambourine. It's called the special sauce roll, whatever. Roll number 3, this one's a little bit trickier. You might have to wax up the head of your tambourine. Finger roll, your middle finger straight out, your thumb is underneath. Keep that straight, and it's the pad of your finger, and you just drag it across the top like a stone skipping over the water, and you get that sound. And this is the rock star one, because the kids see you do this, they're like, what? And all of a sudden tambourine's cool, which it always was. There we go. Sometimes you want to have like a little sponge handy. Pre-COVID, we used to just like lick our finger and be like, yeah, no problem. Now you can't really do that. So you have like a little sponge, you go tap, 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 dry it off, and then away you go. Using the tambourine quickly, if it's soft, on your knee, slide it off just a little bit on a 45-degree angle. Keep your palms down, and it's your middle fingers. Cool. Using the tambourine quickly if it's a quicker, complicated rhythm, if it's loud. Turn the tambourine over. You're holding it the same way as you always would. Thumb on top. Now thumb's on the bottom. Duck. On top of your knee. All of your strong beats are with your hand. All of your weak beats are on your knee. Dot digga dot digga dot digga dot. Digga digga dot. Dot digga dot digga dot digga dot. Right? And then this is where that special sauce roll comes in real handy, because instead of bringing it up here or being like janky down here, you can just, and you're done. Tambourine. All right, bass drum, another super underrated instrument. I always tell the kids that in the Sousa marching band, and I actually have no idea if this is true, but I think it is, the bass drummer got paid the most, because the bass drummers were the buck stops, right? Like it is a critical part of timekeeping in the modern band. And it can also sound really bad, right? Like the bass drum can sound so bad. So there are a couple of tricks to making it sound better. Number 1, you got to be able to control the amount of resonance. That's a lot of ring, That's a lot of, it's still going on a drum, and it rings on both sides, right? So step number one, control the resonance on the resonant side, right? Which is the batter side is the one that you hit, resonant side is the one that you don't. Fingertips on the side, just so that it gives it a little bit of dampening. I put my knee up, and I put my knee just gently in contact with the drum, and then I can actually control how much resonance I want. A little bit more resonance, a little less knee. A little bit less resonant, or a little less ring, a little bit more knee. Right? Really, really dry, really, really knee. Right? You can kind of control that. If you do need extra muffling, you can put a towel down up here and you can kind of tilt your drum. I really recommend one of these tilty stands. Super great. You can put a towel there and you can put your hand here and then you can really muffle it. You're not going to be muffling the resonant side, but it doesn't really matter because you're going to have so much muffling here. That's going to be okay. In terms of playing spot, the most cannon shot-like area of the drum is going to be in the middle. So if you're ripping some 1812 overture, that's your money melon right there. Right dead center of the drum, let's go, give her some. Generally speaking, your best tone quality is going to be a little bit off-center, and it differs with every drum. On this one, I really like the sound right where that mark is, where I wrecked the skin years ago. Like just a little bit under the middle of the drum. Gives a nice combination of resonance and attack, right? In terms of actually using the mallet, my thumb's kind of on the top, and I'm playing it like it's a snare drum, but it's sideways, right? So if I do this, oh, snare drum, oh, bass drum, right? It's the same technique, it's just on the side. When you have to play quick rhythms or rolls, and you have two mallets, again, if you've got like a tilty whirly stand, bonus, oh, there we go. And then you just play, again, maybe not in the middle because that's you don't get a whole ton of ring from the shell in the middle. Maybe out to the sides. And again, slow roll. It's all about the slow roll. That's about how fast I'm going. Also, in terms of really fast articulate passages, again, if you've got something like this, oh, someone should really fix that. You can put it flat and you can just play like that with whatever hardness of mallet you want. Again, you can control the dampening by putting a towel on it, and away you go. If you don't have one of these fancy little tilty whirly things, you can actually pick the drum up, put it sideways on your cross brace stand, and that's going to work just fine too. Bass drum. All right, crash cymbals. Straps, don't put your hands through because it just takes too much time to get them through and out and yada yada yada. It's more of a marching thing. Just pick them up, fingers on the bottom, thumb on top, like that. Sometimes you'll get kids that like have their thumb here. That's a super great way to break your thumb. Keep your thumb off to the side, just pinch there, hold it like that. When you're actually playing the cymbals, a couple different trains of thought on this, or schools of thought on this. There's some people who teach the circle. Cool, great, it works. It's just, again, too many calories for me. It's too much movement. Anytime you're moving that much, something can go wrong. So I like to just keep it nice and simple. You got two parallel lines, you turn them both once, you turn the top one again, you run them into each other straight on. And you get a crash, right? A good crash has two parts to it. It's got the first part and the second part, the k and then the rash. If you're getting a one sound type of thing, it just sounds thin and open, kind of like a, some sort of smoker cough, I guess. Right? The idea to get a full sounding crash is to have the top part connect before the bottom part. So again, two straight lines, turn them both once, turn the top one again, back and forth. You want to make sure you move both cymbals. For whatever reason, it gives you a darker sound than if you only move one. I don't know, I'm not a scientist, it just seems to work. You can also have a little bit of an offset on your cymbals, which will make it easier to get a full sound. So parallel lines, angle, angle on the angle, you get a crash, okay? When you're muting them, depending on your anatomy, you might want to be a little bit more careful in the muting process. But I like to mute in my gut, and I like to mute in my gut in the playing spot. Some people, again, mute in the shoulders. I have so much more padding here than I do up here. Great. Ow. Okay? When I crash, and I mute in my gut, it's immediate. And if I mute in my gut, I always make sure that I mute on an angle too, because if you mute in a straight line, sometimes you miss. Super embarrassing. mute on an angle in your gut. Dynamics on cymbals controlled by how far apart they are when you hit, right? So loud, woo! Quiet, bring it nice and close. In terms of fixing the straps, that's something that we'll go over in the repair section, but it's super easy, I promise. Like, it's not hard. So don't buy those ones with the little balls on them because they're just a pain in the butt to get in and out. I'll teach you how to do this and it'll be super easy. There we go, crash cymbals. All right, crash cymbals. How many times has this strap either broken or fallen off or whatever, and you don't know what to do? Cool thing is, super easy. Once you get these 4 little things, get them set up so that they're north, south, east, and west, okay? North goes south. Make sure you leave just a little bit extra there. North goes south. West goes east, over top of north. South goes north. And then east goes west. And then you just tuck it under that little guy there. You pull all 4 corners. Hoorah! Crash cymbals fixed. Okay, so a couple things that are going to come up all the time in junior high school band land that are just super easy repairs that you might not think of. Number 1, these things, like I said, get the Grover clip, super good Grover wood clip. But these little stringy things, they break on triangle clips all the time. Easiest way to fix that, yeah, you can buy these little like fancy nubbined plastic things, but just get fishing line. Get fishing line. Do 2 lines so that if one breaks, you're still good to go. And just tie a knot at the top. 2 lines of fishing line, done. Sounds great all the time. Don't use that airline cable stuff because it harshes the buzz of the triangle. Don't use like a rubber elastic band, same problem. Don't use a hair elastic, same problem. Get the fishing line and do it that way. If your tambourine, actually this one's pretty good, but you know, you get like that floppy tambourine head thing. It's like if it's made of plastic, good for you. It'll be fairly, it won't move around too much with the temperature. But if it's made of actual calf skin, like if it's warm and humid, it'll be floppy, and if it's super dry and like in Winnipeg, super dry, super cold, it'll get super stretchy and it can actually run the risk of cracking down the middle. Easiest way to do it, if it's super floppy and you just take a hairdryer, which I know is ironic for me. You take a hairdryer and you just start drying the thing out, get it to the pitch you want, dry it out, you're good to go. If it's too tight and you're worried that the skin's going to crack, just take a sponge or a wet cloth or whatever and just put a little bit of water on it, or you can put a damp cloth over top of it and leave it for a couple minutes. That'll help everything even out. That'll add a little bit of moisture to the head and it'll prevent it from stretching too much. The other thing that comes up all the time are like broken mallet tops where like one of these things will just pop right off. Easy to fix. The shafts are a little bit more difficult to fix, so I might recommend getting rattan shafts instead of birch. They're a little bit more durable. But if this thing pops off, easy. Contact cement on the nubbin, contact cement on the inside, done, and it won't come off. It'll even be better than when it was made. Those are easy ones. The other thing that comes up, I mean, there's 1,000 YouTube tutorials on how to change snare drum heads or how to change drum kit heads, so I won't go into that. The one thing I will say is that when you take the head off and put it on, tighten all of the lugs with your fingers first, just so that like you're moving them like this, and then when they don't move anymore, when you're just gently tightening them with your fingers, then use a drum key, and it'll save you so much time because it'll be a little bit more in tune to start with. Last thing, timpani, get someone to do it. I always hire someone. It takes so long to properly clear a set of timpani heads, especially if you don't do it all the time and you don't know the ins and outs. Just hire someone. Go to your local like percussion pro, say, hey, Brendan Thompson, can you come and clear my heads? And he'll come and do that. He's in Manitoba, so if you're elsewhere, you might have to do a little research. But get a timpanist, come and clear your heads. You'll be so happy because then the head and the resonance will sound the same. You won't get that weird like you hit it and then it's a different note after a split second. Totally worth it. So hire someone for your timpani. Snare drum, go look on YouTube or email me. I'll tell you how. And then just a couple of those other quick little fixes. One more thing about timpani mallets. I know earlier I said that I would show you how to sew it up. Turns out that like talking about drums takes time. So we don't have time for me to show you how to sew a timpani mallet. I mean, unless you want to send me an email and then I'll sit there with you on Zoom and I'll show you how to sew it. It's so easy. But don't throw your old timpani mallets away. Don't do it. You can get new felt. You buy a huge sheet of felt and you'll be good for a lifetime. and you can, like I said, you can email me and I'll show you how to do that. All right, folks, as we wrap up here, just a couple of ideas in terms of some print resources that you can have on hand. Things that I use both for teaching private percussion lessons and also worked super, super well for this year of we can play, we can't play, we can play, we can't play, wind instruments. Number one, for snare drum, the Stick Control book. It's by Stone. Super great. That's the one that you throw on with Michael Jackson in the background or Jamiroquai or whatever, and you have them do all those patterns on the back of a chair. I'll tell you what, I had more staff members come in hearing Michael Jackson cranking in the room and us just whacking on chairs. Like, people were popping in and was like, hey, that's so cool, that's great. And like, I wish they would come in and do that when we're ripping through Posey, but they don't. They really like the Michael Jackson, they really like the Jamiroquai, so that was kind of neat. Stick Control. Also, the Mitchell Peters series of snare drum books. So there's the elementary snare method, the intermediate snare method, which is my favorite because it's got a great sequence thing at the front where you can help kids figure out how to incorporate rolls into the rhythms and whatnot. It's really, really great. And then there's the advanced snare method for the keener beaters. That gets pretty tricky. Those are definitely worth a look. If you're only going to buy one of them, buy the intermediate snare method because it starts off pretty cool and under control, and then gets a little bit more complicated in a hurry. For timpani, there's books by Hock Rainier, and they're called Etuden for Timpani because he's German and cool. The volume 1 and 2, again, they start off super easy, 2 drums, nothing too crazy, and then they get a little bit more advanced as time goes on. Great etudes for the starting percussionist. There's also the Mitch Peters Fundamental Method for Timpani. Those etudes, it starts off again just like a whole bunch of front matter, teaching kids how to conceptualize their role and how to do this and how to do that. But then they get into these etudes, which are based on orchestral excerpts, which are actually a lot of fun. So that's a great book. In terms of coordination for multi-limbs, drum kit, multi-percussion setups, that kind of thing. Syncopation for the Modern Drummer by Ted Reed, great book. You can do snare drum and bass drum at the same time, and it's all sorts of syncopated patterns. Great reading material. There's also a book by Copeland called Creative Coordination. You definitely want to pick that one up for your drum kit players. Excellently sequenced exercises to help them both learn how to read drum kit music and also learn how to coordinate their limbs. Super great. For mallets, I like the Modern School for xylophone, marimba, and vibraphone. That's by Morris Goldberg. Again, tons of front matter, lots of little etudes and exercises to get them going, and then it progresses into full-length solos towards the end. Really good book. Vic Firth also has a book called Mallet Technique. Great etudes at the front of that. And then if you're interested in 4-mallet marimba or learning how to do 4-mallet marimba, there's a book by Stevens. It's called Method of Movement for Marimba, and it's pretty much the Bible for he both wrote the book and created the grip, so he knows what he's talking about. In terms of beginner percussion ensemble, I know there's another session on the more advanced percussion ensemble stuff, so I won't wade into that. But in terms of beginner percussion ensemble, it can be tricky to find stuff for at the very, very beginner level. Matt Neufeld also has a collection of baby band percussion ensembles. It's published through the Tap Space catalog, and it's called Stick With It. So it's really great, and it is super, super accessible. It's baby's first percussion ensemble piece. It's awesome. And then any of the stuff at a roll-off, especially like their compilations, their sickles series, tricycles, groove sickles, rhythm sickles, mallet sickles, novelty sickles, all those things. Those are worth a look and worth picking up. Pretty good bang for your buck because you get the whole collection of pieces. And none of them are particularly crazy or challenging. I especially like the tricycles because it's trios and you can expand that to be as many players as you want playing each particular part. They're great books. Lastly, again, thanks for hanging with me today. Feels weird talking to a box, talking to a camera. Big thank you to Long McQuaid for asking me to do this. Trish, thank you. A big thank you to Conselmer as well. They believe in education and they put their money where their mouth is. So check them out and give them some love. If you have any questions, my email is going to follow on a slide. Don't be shy. Send me an email. I will respond. I get lonely. So go ahead, shoot me an email. Any questions, anything you think I left out or want to ask about, go ahead and do that. If you want any notes or handouts or whatever, again, give me an email. Thanks very much for hanging with me, and happy drumming.